sites where Mr. Cooksey would go in his free time and collect the stone artifacts. And he was good because he collected not only ones that we can easily recognize as being tools made by Aboriginal people for use, but also other little things like flakes that were used, that were produced when tools were made. Okay? And we have a collection of Mr. Cooksey at the Australian Museum in Sydney. And I'm pleased to tell you too that we have a few artifacts that were collected exactly on the ground of the school.
Is that wonderful, John? Okay, number 2, please. 3, sorry.
Are there any photographs of him? Where will we look to find them?
Any photographs of Cooksey? John,
No.
have you ever seen anything?
Not that we've been able to
that I
find.
know of.
No,
No,
his family is in Western Australia.
Okay. Maybe
But,
we can get in touch with them.
We could, yeah. And
Sorry.
his son was in charge of the water board for quite some years. So
Do you have an address for him, John?
I do. I'll have to track it down for you, but I'll put it in your hands.
Great. Thank you. WA stands, of course, for Western Australia, and John's going to help us out trying to track down the Reverend Cooksey's family, so that's exciting for us. Can we have the next question, please?
Joseph Lycett painted Aborigines near the mouth of the Hunter. Is this a true picture of them at that time?
Oh, this is the picture here, John. I understand. So do you think that's what it would have been like, really?
Yes, I think the early artists in early colonial times, they would have a glimpse of Aboriginal people living traditional life. And I think what they painted in terms of how people looked like, what tools they used, they would paint them with spears or boomerangs. Here on this painting is the hut made, covered with sheets of bark. So that would be quite realistic. I suppose what they did a little bit beautified as doing mostly trees and shrubs. They were painted more in kind of European style, but actually this particular artist, he would know from experience some Aboriginal people and see them living in the land.
Question time.
Show us the way the Aborigines lived, don't they? What is the most significant fact, do you think?
Could you hear them?
Question a little bit.
Georgie, stand up and just speak in a big clear voice because you're fussing and we can't hear you fuss. Mike and I.
The artefacts you have at the museum show us the way the Aborigines lived, don't they? What is the most significant fact, do you think?
Okay, thank you. The most of the stone artifacts were used for working wood, so they were mostly woodworking tools. And perhaps you can tell me what wooden artifacts people would use. Who can tell me at least 3 or 4 artifacts that Aboriginal people would use?
Spear?
Yes? Yeah? Boomerangs? One more perhaps? Spears, yeah.
Shields?
Shields, yeah, great. And all of those need to be carved with stone tools because Aboriginal people didn't use the metal tools. So the stone tools were like universal hardware. So what we use now is a chisel and saw and axe and the rest of the heads. Aboriginal people used the stone tools to make all wooden tools they needed.
Number 6.
What kind of lives did the indigenous people live? Did they camp by the fire, by the river because they fished?
Okay, well, people who lived along the coast, like here in your area, mostly in the summer and early autumn, they would spend time close to the sea, to the estuaries, to the river, and they would spend whole day literally fishing, collecting shellfish, cooking fish, resting during the middle of the day. And when they collected a lot of shellfish, you would have what they call shell middens or kitchen middens, because when you open the shell, whether it's oyster or mussel, you take the soft tissue to eat and you leave the shell behind. And gradually, after years, these shell middens become larger and larger. Some of them are kilometers long along the river. And also people would have very well-defined boundaries, so they have their own estate that they wouldn't go beyond unless they negotiated special permission from their neighbors to visit or to come to use some other resources that were not in their areas. And also people would come in different places for a few weeks here and for a few weeks there, so that resources are not, like fish and shellfish, were not used up in one area. They were used a little bit and moved again. Now, in winter, the families, groups of families would move probably a bit further inland to the bush, and they would do more hunting. They would hunt kangaroos and possums, collect more plant fruits like nuts and wild berries and tubers, all different bush tucker they would get from bush, and that was the kind of different between summer and winter lifestyle.
You need to get all of this down.
They're lucky to
They are lucky to do it.
do.
Apart from the Reverend
Shout. Paint it. Big voice, don't.
Apart from the Reverend Cooksey, did anyone else document or collect artifacts that you know?
Yes, there were few more local people who were collecting artifacts from in this area, and there are a few more collections that are present at the Australian Museum. I think that there's few artifacts that were collected on the school ground. They were actually not collected by Mr. Cooksey, but another person whose name, I'm sorry, I forgot, but I will take it for you.
Thank you.
And I can probably also check names of other collectors who collected in the Newcastle area, if you're interested to know.
Question 8, please.
Is there any record of paintings done by these Aboriginal people?
Paintings done by Aboriginal people.
By these particular people.
Well, it's not that I know of directly. However, people along the coast. I'll give you an example from Sydney because that might be instructive. People did carving on a flat slabs of stones, and in some rock shelters. Often they are sea animals like whales and fish, but also land animals like possums and kangaroos. and there's a lot of them in bushland around Sydney. However, whenever the houses were built and where people lived, all these carvings were destroyed. So the records are very difficult to obtain without very thorough surveys and searching through the bush. I know that a number of these carvings and drawings done by Aboriginal people survived quite well on Sydney sandstone. But I don't know from the top of my head whether you have some records in this area. We could check probably.
Gianni, do you know of any?
I don't know of any painted caves or anything in this area that I know of, except for these artefacts that were uncovered by Cooksey. I'm just trying to wonder where they could have.
They stay up here on Cessnock, don't they?
Yeah.
And
Well, you've got the
those places,
Vyomi cave in Cessnock and Milbrodale. Wherever you have cave areas, you've probably got a chance that there'll be paintings in those areas. But I'm trying to think where those areas would be here, probably near the coast, if ever, at some point.
Perhaps like Stan said, they've been rather removed or destroyed or...
Well, that's right. You know, especially on the tops of hills, and we have pretty important hills here in Mayfield, and what was on there at one time, I don't know.
John, you could have been, there was stone quarried where Who's house is by Cribbett to build his cellars. There could have been carvings on those.
Yeah.
We don't know.
No.
But also closer to the river, there would be sedimentary layers of sedimentary rocks, and they would change quite rapidly with even in a matter of a few decades, let alone hundreds of years. So the river would sort of change the bed a little bit, and what was on the coast could be washed out. But also close to the river, if there were some significant cliffs or sort of sturdy rocks, that would be option to, yeah.
Yes.
Number 9, please.
Not long after the early 1900s, it seemed the number of Aboriginal people living near the river increased. Why do you think this happened?
The last part of the question, I'm sorry, I missed.
Read, stand up now and read it again.
Not long after the early 1900s, it seemed the number of Aboriginal people living near the river increased. Why do you think this happened?
Decreased.
Reading questions then.
Well, what's happened was that when the colonists moved in, they always wanted to get the best, most attractive part of land. And obviously, lakes, river mouths, estuaries, open land like a pasture that could be good for the cows were quickly taken, and people were basically moved out of their land quite often by force. And for indigenous people, this connection with land was so vital and necessary. And as I mentioned earlier, the people didn't live just on the land, it was their own land. If they were pushed out of it, they had nowhere to go really. And not long after, colonies established missions where people were sort of forced to live in some kind of enclosed environment, and often people from different cultures and different languages would be mixed together. So, and that would account for the rapid decrease of population in your area as well, soon after the beginning of the colonization.
Number 10.
We'd love to hear stories and see the artifacts you've run with you. Would you like to show them to us now?
Yeah, show and tell time.
John, Stan, before you begin, I'd like you to read a show two Indigenous parents we have. Your parents?
Yeah,
Karen. And this is Stan, the man who's got all the
Nice to meet you. I'm good, thank you. Hello.
Do you know Vera Deacon? No? She's a historian.
Hello, how are you?
And she's here obviously because she's really interested. And this is Gianna De Bravio.
How you going?
You know, he's an artist from the university. He's been helping us with our national festival.
Oh, okay.
How you going?
So now, Stan, show the children, would you like them out or would it be easier to sit them sitting around you?
Maybe yes, yeah.
So what
Because
we
it
might...
would be nice if
Yeah,
they
they
can touch and handle some artifacts, that's okay.
Children, you can stop now. Now, the front row, stand, and just pull your chair back and then pull your table back and then come out the front. Thank you. You can be run out the front. Right, the first table where it's come out will be the first table with pens away, rulers away, pencils away. Blake, come here. Blake, come here. Doctor, come here. Stand. These are there's one more right there. Blake. Pop down, guys. Quick. Come out and sit and stand neat, please. And I mean sit. What about a circle stand?
A circle would be
A
perfect.
circle, the kids. A circle.
Excellent. Okay, as I was saying, the stools were used mostly for working wood, for woodwork. And here is the large chopper. And I just try to explain a little bit that this comes from bigger block of rock and was detached from it by using a hammer stone. It's like you can imagine like a large potato-shaped stone, that someone actually hit it in the right place to get this large flake out. So you can see it's flat here, and it's shaped differently on the top. And then they turn it upside down that way, and with a smaller hammer stone, detached a few flakes along the edge to make it sharp edge here, and that would be used, held in hand, and would be used for carving some bigger piece of wood, maybe taking a relatively large branch of the tree to make boomerang or a club, okay? And you can touch it here with your fingers and see it is sharp. It's not sharp like an axe because it's a different angle, but that was used for the for the sort of bigger woodwork. Now you can touch it and look at it. Please just don't bang one against the other, okay? Because that will flake them again. And this is the smaller chopper, very similar, but a smaller, for finer work. So if you actually have roughly made, say, boomerang, with this chopper you can start shaping it into finer shape, okay? But it's the same concept. Now I've got a couple of tools that are sort of between the chopper and the scraper. And scraper is probably, it's a technical term in archaeology, but you can imagine it's the closest to chisel. And that was used for doing even finer work. Okay, so if you have your boomerang roughly shaped, then you can start making fine details of it, making it thinner, making sure that the top side is concave and the side under is flat. Okay, so they are examples of scrapers. Okay, and these are even smaller ones. And they look sort of differently a little bit, but they were really used for the similar type of work. So if you have a spear, well-shaped spear, but you need to sharpen its end, you would probably use a scraper or the chisel like this to do your sharpening. So you sharpen it like a big pencil, okay, to make sure that the end of the spear is nice and sharp. And probably you would then use a bit of a fire to harden the wood in a fire. So you can look at this chisels. Good. Get it out. It's a stubborn little thing. Okay. Well, yeah. Other examples of these chisels, because the form of the tool was not so important as the working edge. So every tool would be slightly different, but the working edge was vital to have it in the right angle and the right sharpness. Now, I was telling you that this big chopper was detached from a larger block of stone. And now we're going to talk about artifacts that many people do overlook, but Mr. Cooksey was very clever and he recognized them. So, to actually make those tools, people would bring the block of rock, or sometimes like a large pebble, and start flaking it with what we call hammerstone. And often they would attach hundreds of flakes till they get something that was good for a particular tool. And those flakes would be left on the side. But they can't be produced by natural causes. They need to be done by humans. And this is a core from which probably smaller flakes were made. And what is important to remember is that each person through their lifetime would probably produce thousands and millions of little flakes as the byproduct of making tools and using tools. And even sometimes when the chopper like this become blunt, people would reshape the edge by detaching a few more flakes to make it sharp again. Okay? So that's why if you go and you find somewhere along the river or on sand dunes, depending on which part of the country you are, if you find thousands of stone flakes and among them some cores like this, or some choppers or some scrapers, you would know that that was site where Aboriginal people would make the tools. Okay? Now, few more. Yeah, that actually was probably a river stone that was nicely smoothed in the river. And then someone made a flake out of it and detached a few flakes along the edge to make it sharp. Did you try to check how sharp it is? Okay. Now, there are few cases where stone artifacts were not used quite for woodwork, but for something else. Very thin, sharp flakes could be used for cutting fiber, like string, like reeds, grasses. Thank you. Okay. And also, around 3,000 years ago, which is about, 20 times as long as beginning of the school. Is that right? Anyway, long time ago, the flaking method become more controlled, and people were able to produce long blades like this. And some of them could be used directly as the spear points. So imagine if you have such a nice sharp flake as a spear, it would get you kangaroo in no time at all. Okay? But many of these sharp long flakes were also retouched as, we call it. One edge was, tiny little flakes were detached on the edge to make it blunt on purpose. And what happened was that this blunt edge was embedded in the shaft of the spear along the spearhead. So it could be something like 30 or 20 of these little knife-like things inserted into spear with the use of resin or gum, and sometimes bound with the thin twine, some fabric, some very string of the natural fiber. And spear like this was really deadly. So if the animal was hit with it, it has no chance of surviving. Okay? You can look at this point gently, please. Okay? No, it's not a blood, it's a bit of a glue. I'm sorry to say. Yeah.
Girly bullets.
And also I've got one more little chisel or scraper, and I forgot to say that some of them were attached to the end of spear thrower. Who knows what a spear thrower? How it works? Who can explain how it works? Yeah? But how it works? Who can tell me? Yes?
On the kangaroo.
It extends the length of your arm because you hold the spear thrower, end of the spear goes on the peg. So it works that if your arm was much longer, so you have more force to throw the spear with a spear thrower. And if you do so, spear goes twice as far comparing to throwing it just by hand. So anyway, on the end of the spear thrower, people would put often a little chisel like this. So when they travel and hunt and do some work in the land, and they need quickly to do some impromptu work, woodwork, they have the chisel handy. They don't need to carry it. They don't need to look for right rock. They don't need to flake it again to get this chisel. They have it with them. Okay? So that's very handy tool. Now, any questions?
Oh, Stan, any of this, what was found around on the Wabika land? Much of this stuff?
Yeah, all this material I brought here was really collected around Mayfield by Mr. Cooksey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
On the school ground.
Oh, but there were even a few pieces collected in the school ground as well by different collectors. Yeah.
Was that Loch? L-O-C-H? C-W Loch?
No, the name beginning with C, I'm afraid.
Was it a C?
Yeah, but I can't recall the name at the moment. And then, as I was telling earlier, that there were a few other collectors who also collected artifacts from the area. So it's not only Mr. Cooksey, but I think his collection is probably bigger than others. But there were a few other collectors.
Oh, okay, so most of this was found around Mayfield.
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it was taken from here probably in 20s or 30s. Now it's coming back for a visit, and so people can do it.
So when was Cooksey about, Stan? Was it 1920s, was it, or?
Our records show that that was, I think, early 30s or late 20s when we got collection from him.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that he would collect probably a couple of decades prior to his donation to the museum. And also, he probably was older then because part of his collection was donated to us by his son, who maybe collected himself too, maybe just donated his father's collection to us.
So, Gianna, you think some's in the British Museum? We emailed them. They said no.
Yeah, well that's good, because at least we can sort out. Within the family, I'm trying to remember who told me that story. It was either Cole or maybe it came from the family that there were another 5,000 artefacts that ended up in the British Museum. So, yeah, it would have been interesting. But he landed here around 1925. He wasn't a reverend.
Wasn't he?
No, he was a Mr. Cooksey because he worked at the BHP in the survey department. I think that's why he drew the actual artefacts. And he and his friend C.W. Locke, that was one other character that he met when he was here, and another fella. They probably had a whole network of men that he connected with when he got here, because he was very interested in locating early artefacts. But I think Daniel Cooksey died very soon after, like 1927 or something like that. He was dead. It was in a window of about a few years.
I see, yes.
And then the ethnologist from the museum came up to report the findings. Thorpe.
Yeah.
And it was a very interesting story there as to what was going on, you know, especially with McCarthy, who was yes, there was an interesting story there.
Okay, we have two questions here.
Children,
You want
to
to
stand,
ask
please.
How many artifacts there is in our collection or out there? From Mayfield area, as the record shows, it's about 170. But there are few from just, a little bit further, not Mayfield itself, but along the river on both sides. Yes, next question.
Do you have any new artifacts?
New artifacts, meaning? Oh, you mean the stone artifacts, but they are younger than this. That's interesting, because you see, judging by those little blades, the peak time when they were used was about 3,000 years ago. By the time white colonists moved to Australia, these things were not used anymore. So this gives us a bit of chronology of these artifacts that they probably could date together as the set, collected on the sides, at least to that time. Some of them would be obviously younger, but it's very difficult to date the stone artifacts without some kind of context that allows you for analyzing charcoal, dating charcoal, and so on. So we don't know, but I would imagine that all these artifacts would probably be older than beginning of colonial Australia. Because, as we were talking about it, people were very quickly moved out of the area by colonists. And also, people would very quickly adopt metal tools. And what is interesting too, that people would adopt the metal, but use them for quite a while, not as white people would use them, or Europeans, but use metal in combination with their own traditional tools. So they would use the metal to make the chisel, like if it was made from stone tool, except that it was made from metal. Okay?
Vera, do you have a question? Do you have a question? Vera? Yeah.
I'm just fascinated. I wish you'd been here in 1933 when I was here. What wonderful opportunity it is for the children to actually handle it and to hear you explain it. It's marvellous. Thanks, Sue, for inviting me.
Yes.
I'm glad I made it.
Vera lived on, let's Basket Island, and it used to come across on a boat to school. You've got a little excuse me, a little recollection of an Aboriginal person on the island, have you?
Oh no, he was a visitor.
Oh,
Moses, he was a friend of my father. I would like to say that further along the south arm of the river on Ash Island, there was a tribe known as the Ash Island tribe, recorded in the 1828 census, as well as the Coal River tribe down at Newcastle, So there were a few around, not many, about 150 men, women and children. And some of the names have been recorded in these blanket records by Reverend Mayfield and John Warner.
there it is, there.
Yes.
There. Just there, Stan.
Oh, I see, yes, yes.
So there is, I came across a description of people riding their horses along here through the work to work at the copper work, and those working the Aborigines hunting along here. And I brought a map along to show the teacher what it is like.
Could you use one more
The
question?
question here, you have a question here. Oh, Liam, what was your question? Sorry.
Most of the tools made of stone.
What was made of stone?
Most of the tools.
Well, okay, that's an interesting question because, as I was saying, people use the wooden tools, like we were just talking about the boomerangs, shields, spear throwers, spears. Now, they were also using baskets, bags, and nets made of twine, and variety of organic material, plant material, grasses, reeds. But all this material need to be cut somehow, processed, carved, and the stone tools were like universal hardware, okay, to allow people to process other material. Even some people would make pendants from shell. And along the coast here, and again, that was within the last 700 years before colonization, when people start using fish hooks made from shell. And again, for doing it, they needed a stone tool, something that is harder than shell to carve it. Yes, that's a very good question. No? It's a pleasure. Thank you so much. Well, I must say that I feel very privileged to be invited and to visit your school and to see your wonderful work. So thank you for the invitation.
Well, Stan, would you mind just sitting still for a few minutes while I sort of draw you?
No, not at all. I love it.
I'm sort of shrinking here.